Good morning. Welcome to another edition of Breakfast with the Rabbi. As you can see by my mug and by my tie, that it is beginning to look a lot like Hanukkah. So let's get started. We have a very interesting topic for you today. The topic is an electric menorah kosher? Now, that might be a very controversial topic to some, but I assure you it will be very, very interesting. Let's first understand just a bit of the background. I'm not here today to tell you about the history of Hanukkah. You know, it's not a lecture about Hanukkah in and of itself, but rather about a specific aspect of Hanukkah, in fact, the primary mitzvah of Hanukkah. But I'll tell you briefly that Hanukkah is a holiday which is rabbinic in origin. It's not one of the biblical holidays or festivals, but rather a rabbinic holiday. It was ordained by the rabbis. You can find more about it in Masechet Shabbat, in Tractate Shabbat, on 21b. So it's interesting that our topic for today, because if you Google, is an electric menorah kosher, you'll find some sites which say, you know, the electric menorah is forbidden, and here's why. I'm going to tell you why it's forbidden. Come on, that's not the way to study. How are you going to take Torah seriously if you just look at things from a conclusion? The proper way to address this is to study the sources, and then we reach a conclusion. So let's go ahead and do that very thing. What I would like to first address is, what is the proper method of lighting the Hanukkah menorah? And does an electric menorah fall into one of the ways that we can light the menorah properly on Hanukkah? That's really the question. So let's first begin with the Talmud. What does the Talmud, again, in Tractate Shabbat, have to say about lighting or kindling the menorah? So the Talmud says a couple of things. First of all, the purpose of lighting the menorah, which I'm sure many of you know, is something called Persume Nisa. What does that mean? It means that we are required to publicize the miracle of Hanukkah. Okay? So not just that we remember the miracle, but we have to publicize the miracle. And the way we do that is by placing the menorah in our window. The prevalent practice in Israel, by the way, is that they light the Chanukiah, the menorah, in a special box outside where people can see it in the public square. There are people who do that, outside of Israel as well. But in Israel, that is the practice. But the prevalent practice outside of Israel is to light it in the home at the window. So as far as the appropriate way to light the menorah, Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says, all the oils are suitable for the Hanukkah lamp, and olive oil is the highest quality of the oils. The preferable way to light is with olive oil. That is what we would call the mitzvah min hamuvchar. Okay, the most preferable way to perform the mitzvah. Now, later on, in the Shulchan Aruch, in the Code of Jewish Law, the Ramah, Rabbi Moses Isserles, who lived in the 16th century, states that it is also permitted to use candles. He says the following. He says, their light is just as clear as that of oil, since they also produce a very pure flame. So already we see in the 16th century that there is some room for flexibility when it comes to lighting the menorah. So, what about the electric menorah? Are they sufficient to fulfill the mitzvah? Now, this question has many far-reaching effects because it becomes an issue of addressing modernity. There was no such thing as electricity during the times of the Talmud. In fact, Thomas Edison patented the first commercially successful bulb in 1879, but beyond Edison, it was the Italian inventor Alessandro Volta who developed the first practical method of generating electricity, the voltaic pile, in 1800. So the question of electricity in regard to the observance of mitzvot is a recent one. Naturally, it would be because of what I just said. So recent, relatively speaking. Many authorities opposed the electric menorah, but some did permit it. Some permitted it blanketly, others permitted it only under certain exigent circumstances. Let's first take a look at some of the objections raised to the use of an electric menorah. Firstly, there are those who argue that it compromises the principle of persume nisa, the requirement to publicize the miracles of Hanukkah, since electricity is what is commonly used for light today. There is nothing distinguishable about the menorah because it will get lost in the shuffle together with all other electrical appliances we regularly use. This is a very weak argument. Firstly, the menorah is placed in a specific area, right, by the window, as we discussed, visible to the public. The purpose of an electric menorah is also quite apparent to anyone viewing it from outside someone's home, or likewise if someone's lighting outside. Also, when wax candles were used back in the day, the same kinds of candles were used to light one's home. So I really don't see this argument as a valid one. Let's take a look at another objection. There are a number of them. I'm only taking a look at two. So let's take a look at one other. As you may know, the menorah lights are supposed to contain sufficient oil or wax to burn for approximately 30 minutes. Some argue that electric bulbs do not contain the requisite amount of fuel needed to accomplish that task. This argument is also weak because as soon as you plug in an electric menorah, it contains enough power to last for 30 minutes and beyond. Furthermore, the Shulchan Aruch tells us that the commandment of lighting the menorah is fulfilled by simply lighting the candle. So even if you argue that the electric menorah doesn't have enough fuel sufficient for 30 minutes, it still does enable you to fulfill the commandment because essentially the bulb does light up. Now there are authorities who permit the electric menorah b'diavad, in other words, in situations where you do not have any alternative. The most common situation where this would be required is when traveling. When you're traveling, there are certain hotels that do not allow candles to be lit. Sometimes, in the hospital, you're unable to light candles or oil, etc. Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, great halachic decisor of blessed memory, was in Israel, maintains that if there is no alternative, one may turn on a flashlight and recite a beracha over it, because its filament is similar to a wick. Some halachic authorities maintain that in such cases, when you must use electric bulbs, no brachot may be recited. Rabbi Yosef Messas, however, who was a very innovative Sephardic halachic decisor, who was the chief rabbi of Haifa and died in 1974, ruled that one is allowed to light an electric menorah and may recite the blessings before flipping the switch or tightening the light bulb. Those who are more lenient about using the electric menorah emphasize that the main mitzvah is to produce light, and therefore any source of light may be used for the menorah. So here's my take on all of this, knowing what we just said, and this is, we could say a lot more, but that would go on for a very, very long time. But I'm trying to give you here, I'm trying to emphasize the main points. So I would say the following. Ideally, one should use olive oil or wax candles to fulfill the mitzvah. However, I would like to add the following. I have been asked about the permissibility of using an electric menorah numerous times over the years. And, my position always was that there's something about it that, weakens Jewish life. I never really took the question very seriously. More recently, however, people who have posed the question have cited legitimate safety concerns. A couple of years ago, right here in my own neighborhood of Brooklyn, New York, I live in Sheepshead Bay, and on the sixth night of Hanukkah, 3 children and their mother were killed, and other family members were badly injured by a fire which started from a menorah. The fire department believed that the glass cups which held the oil may have cracked under extended heat exposure, spilling oil and spreading flames. And frankly, it was a very, very, very tragic story. In that vein, if you personally feel that it is safer to use an electric menorah, or if you are in a place where it is impossible to use oil or candles, then by all means go ahead and use an electric menorah. With that said, one should not use an electric menorah as a means of bypassing the rigors of performing the mitzvah properly. If you simply want your Hanukkah experience to be one of convenience, for example, you're too lazy to go out and buy candles or cups of oil, then that is not a legitimate excuse. Today, by the way, with the virus and everything, you can also order these items as well. But not wanting to put in much preparation to Hanukkah is not a legitimate excuse to use an electric menorah. Today, it happens to be easier to use olive oil because you can buy a those pre-filled glass cups. All right? It's not like when I was a kid, you had to set up the cups, you had to put in the wicks in the proper place, right in the middle, and then fill it from a bottle of olive oil, and then you end up making a big mess. It's not like that anymore. And it happens to be today, certain mitzvot are more convenient because of what's available on the market. So if you have to use an electric menorah for reasons which we have already mentioned, then you should use it as if it is a menorah with oil or candles. You should light it at the proper time, after sunset. Obviously, on Friday afternoons, we have to light it before sunset. because of Shabbat. You should recite the requisite brachot, the blessings. After you light, you should sing hymns of Hanerot Halalu or Mos Tzur or both. And you should linger around the menorah for a while, about a half hour is the custom. And these are the steps you must follow, regardless of the kind of menorah you are using. In this way, you will demonstrate that the menorah is not simply just another appliance. That, in other words, it's not analogous to a television or a computer where you just flick on a switch and you have everything you need at your disposal. Rather, it is an object which is uniquely sacred and is being utilized in a scrupulous fashion. These are the things that you have to demonstrate when using the electric menorah. So, therefore, whichever kind of menorah you use, we need to show that we take the mitzvah seriously. In other words, that it's just not some kind of escape haven from personal responsibility. In any event, I thank you very much for your attention, and whichever menorah you choose to use, I say to you, may its lights illuminate our lives and give us hope for a better tomorrow.